Hi, this is Will Brown with St. Augustine Record. We're here with St. Augustine High and Carolinas High historian Rick Weedman, who has seen many, many games over the years, and he is going to share some of his thoughts and his memories of the Jackets with us here. So, Rick, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to represent St. Augustine High School. I'm a graduate of 1964. I began my career, I guess you would call it, I was 8 years old, 1954. Francis Field was the site. St. Augustine was playing Palatka High School that night. Francis Field at that time was a baseball stadium. The Saints played there. In the wintertime, they converted the outfield into a football field, and the Yellow Jackets would play all their home games there. My father worked for Zurich Cleaners, and of course, we didn't have enough money really to get into the game that night, so he pulled up along beside a block wall, which was about 8 foot tall, to keep people from seeing the game. And we stood on top of his truck and watched the game that night. St. Augustine was victorious. They came out and beat Palatka by a score of 14-0. I was fascinated with the game, and from then on, I was a Yellow Jacket fan, and I still am today, Will.
Well, let me ask you one quick question about that 54 season. That was the first undefeated season in school history.
They went 11-0 that year under Walt Slater, won the East Florida Conference, I think was the name of it, and that was the only undefeated season that Carolinas had.
So, in your opinion, do you think it was just perfect timing that you just saw the pinnacle of Carolinas High football, and that just is what roped you in over the last 50-something years?
Yes, I would say that, yes. Even before I was going to those games, I would always follow it. And back in those days, the St. Augustine record was not like it is today. We have a 7-day-a-week record, with sports and stuff. At one point, you would have the game on Friday night. The record was not published on Saturdays. It would come out on Sunday. So from Friday night until Sunday, if you didn't catch a few highlights on Friday night by Pappy Schilling, who worked at WFOY at that time, you didn't know what was going on. The only other paper that I know of in the area at that time that covered most of the games was the Florida Times-Union out of Jacksonville. And if you were lucky to get a paper on Saturday mornings, sometimes it would have an article in there about St. Augustine, sometimes it would not. So, but yes, that was my first game, and as I said, I just fell in love with it. And I could not wait for football season every year.
And since that time, about 8 or 9 years ago, you did some wonderful research, and you went back and found the result of every single game of Carolinas and St. Augustine dating back to 1925.
To 1925. Let me back up just a little bit and give a little bit of credit to some people who helped me along the way. Irvin Drysdale, who was the original owner of the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, had played 1925, 26, and 27 for St. Augustine at that point. He became the coach in 1927 and coached just 1 year with the team. And he had a lot of records and stuff and photos back then, and he shared it with me, and we sat down and talked for several meetings back and forth. Also, Walter Lawton, they used to call him Bull Walton. He was a lineman for St. Augustine, Carolinas, and a very, very strong man, very stout, right to the point. He told me about many of the games, also showed me records and photos that he had at that time. Charlie LaPrade played in the late 40s, I guess it was about 47, 48, somewhere in there. He is the only All-American from St. Augustine to go to the University of Florida and graduate over there. Charlie was an outstanding football player, and I got a lot of information from him. There was a book written way back in the 40s by a gentleman by the name of Prince Bagwell. It was called Jacket Pride. It had covered quite a few of the games, not everything from 1925 up through about 1948, 49, somewhere in there. And of course, he graduated from St. Augustine and went on to be a writer and stuff. I got with Prince, got a copy of his book, checked out a lot of the scores, a lot of the information that was in there, and I want to really thank him for it. M.D. Strickland played in the teams in 1949, 50, 51, 52, somewhere in there. He gave me a lot. Joseph Pomar also, he played on that team that was undefeated, and he gave me a lot of information. Other people like Pete Osborne. Pete Osborne wrote for the St. Augustine Record, and he was an outstanding gentleman. He gave me a lot of information too, and a lot of hints, and I'll tell you something about him in a minute. Got information from the old Catalina's High School, which has since burned down. They lost a lot of their records and stuff when that fire happened. St. Augustine High School, some from there, and also Pappy Schilling, as I said, who was my boss when I first started in the business. When I started out I'd call it an adventure. I was only going to go back to 1960, which was the beginning of St. Augustine High School, present day. And I started that at the St. Augustine Record. I went down and I saw Pete Osborne, told him, what I wanted, and Pete said, "Come right on in, young man, and sit down." Little did I know, the St. Augustine Record at that time had what they call microfiche. It was on rolls of film and film and film and film and film. For 5 years, I went through this, went all the way back to 1925, gathering all the information I could versus annuals I had versus people that I had talked to verify, what I could find out. And it was Pete, like I said, who told me, he said, why don't you not just start with St. Augustine, but go all the way back to the history of it, for football. And so I've got to give him a lot of credit. I really admired Pete, and St. Augustine Record really had a really good sports reporter at that time. The first games I found out, a little bit of the history, were played at Lewis Park, which no longer exists. It was down at the end of Marine Street, where the old Flagler Hospital used to be, and that's been torn down and everything. They played there from 1925 to 1936. In 1931, they installed, from what I was told and from what information I could find, the first lights for night games, because all your other games before that time had been played either on Friday afternoon or Saturday sometime. They took wash tubs, put them on poles, put the lights in, and put them up. And that was the first games played there at Lewis Park. 1936 to 1959, they moved the games over to Francis Field, and they played there back and forth during baseball season and football season. So, as I said, in springtime, it would be baseball. In the fall time, they would convert it over to a football field. 1960 to the present day, all the games have been played out at St. Augustine High School. I thoroughly enjoyed my 4 years at St. Augustine High School. I didn't weigh but about 110 pounds, and I went out one spring to play football in my junior year. Well, it took me about 2 days to find out I was not a football player. So I backed off of that. They beat me to death like a rag doll, and I got out of that.
Well, I did want to share something with you, and some of the things I found that Francis Field, which is obviously named after Fred Francis.
Fred Francis, yes. He donated it.
He played football at St. Augustine High School in the teens.
Yep.
It was in the 1915 team that was a really, really good team. And that was one of those surprising things to find in my research about this story. I wanted to ask you a couple more, and then we'll let our viewers online kind of check out the Prince story for more of our conversation. You've been going to games for over 50 years. You've seen 50 seasons. Who are some of the names and some of the players that you just will not forget from your research, as well as from your being a radio color commentator, as well as just being an alumni and fan? Who are some names you will never forget?
One name that stands out to me was in the 71-72 season was a young man by the name of Bryce Wilson. He was a running back for St. Augustine High School. Back in those days, St. Augustine only had maybe 28 to 30 players, so you had to play both ways. It wasn't like it is nowadays with these special teams. Ronnie Swimer was a quarterback then, and he was outstanding also, and sticks out in my mind. Another one was Monty Duncan, and Monty Duncan was a running back for St. Augustine High School. He graduated and went on and played at the University of Florida for, I guess, 4 years over there. Other players that come along, I'm trying to think. Brian James, thank you so much. Brian James, outstanding football player. Brian wasn't afraid of anybody. I don't care if he was 300 pounds, he would take you on. And he went on to play at the University of Florida. I can still remember when we played Tennessee. I'm a Florida alum. When we played Tennessee, they'll never forget that name as long as they live. For 2 years, he ran touchdowns back on punts and kickoffs against them, and he stands out. But that's basically, the ones that really jump out in front of me. Of course, I wish I had been able to see Charlie LaPrade play also. He was an outstanding football player.
And interestingly enough, earlier this week, LaPrade would have celebrated his 89th birthday.
Yes.
And we're going to, in the video portion of this here, since the season is going to kick off on Friday night, and you still go to games, and I know that you watched the Seabreeze contest, the preseason contest. What are you hoping for this season? Because Coach Braddock, as we've understood, is the first alum to come back and lead the Jackets since Coach Drysdale way back in the early 20s.
Yes. I think they'll have an outstanding season this year. Will, from what I saw Friday night, either St. Augustine is loaded or Seabreeze doesn't have anything. It was almost a scrimmage. They physically beat the Sand Crabs on both sides of the line, on the defense and also on the offense. I think we have an outstanding quarterback this year again. Of course, he's a senior. This is his 4th year. Running back there again, outstanding. So I really look for him to go pretty much all the way. The one game that stands out each year to me, and it seems like it's the hardest game for St. Augustine, and they've come out and won it, was this team up in the northern part of the county.
Bartram.
And for the last few years, it looked like Bartram was just going to demolish St. Augustine. I don't know what Coach Wiles went in and said at halftime, but whatever it was, it must have been the will of Coach Wiles, because when they come out the second half, St. Augustine looked like a different club.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for watching it and sharing your memories with us here on staugustine.com. Make sure to head over to our print edition to read the full details of our conversation, as well as much more about the history of St. Augustine High / Kettler Williams High football. So this is Will Brown at staugustine.com. Thanks so much for watching.